Welcome back, viewers. Welcome back to the akaCatholic podcast. Thank you, Lord. As you can see, we finally pulled together all the technology pieces possible or necessary to bring Father. We're going to talk about what we call Father here in just a minute, because I just learned something extraordinary. For all the years that Father Marqués has been contributing to akaCatholic and been a friend of mine offline, I just found out literally before I hit record. Tell him, Father, how last names work in Spain so that we can get this right and keep it right going forward.
Sure. Hi, Louie, and all to our viewers. In Spain, there's a custom of we all have two last names, surnames. First our fathers and then our mothers. So nobody here would call me Father Campo because that's my mother's surname, and that comes second. If anyone would call me Father here, it would be Father Marqués. You could say Father Marqués Campo and include the two surnames, but if it's just one, it's the first one, the father's one. So I would be actually Father Marqués. It's just a custom here. We use both names, both surnames of our parents.
Well, we like to try to get things right here. So
sure. From
this point forward, it is for Father Marqués. So
very well.
Even though we have a lot of regular viewers and readers, they know you to an extent because you've been contributing on the blog for a lot of years now. But just to kind of recap a very brief bit of your history. You entered seminary in Oviedo, Spain in 1989, and you were ordained on Pentecost Sunday of 1996. And by the way,
right,
this was
26th of May.
Right. So this is when the church celebrates the actual Pentecost, which has absolutely nothing to do with the new Pentecost that took place in the 1960s, just to make it perfectly clear.
I wrote an article about that on your blog.
Yes, you did. A very good one. Right. With some doctrinal errors in the Novus Ordo celebration of Pentecost, which is stunning. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, the degree to which the lex credendi, the law of belief, informs the law of prayer in the sacred liturgy of the Holy Roman Catholic Church, not so much in the Novus Ordo. Anyway, Father, I thought we would begin, if you don't mind. I just want to ask you a few questions about your relationship with the liturgy and things of that nature. To start with, I'm curious to know, I don't think I've ever asked you this privately. In the years prior to entering seminary, were you exposed to the traditional Latin Mass at all, even if only through books or other media? To what extent were you exposed to it?
Well, since I was born in 1962, as a very small child, I did have some limited experience with the traditional rite. Not so much in Spain that I don't recall too much. I was too little then, because we moved when I was about 3 to the United States, and I grew up in the Chicagoland area. And the first parish I knew back in the States was in the Polish neighborhood, St. Hyacinth in Chicago. And it was a wonderful parish. This was 1966, 67, 68. My first school experience. And the parish school was run by good traditional Catholics. As a pious Catholic family, we felt at home. Obviously, none of us spoke Polish or English. As a child, I picked up English rather sooner than my parents did, obviously. But the parish we felt at home because it was a Catholic parish. And the nuns were like mothers to us. The priests were like fathers to us. And of course, it was a different time. My generation, it was a very special one, I guess. We went to Mass at school. And I fondly remember the vestments, the Roman vestments, and the sweet smell of incense, and the chanting. And what always captivated me, and as a child, these things really impact you for life, is the chanting of Per omnia saecula saeculorum. I thought, that sounds amazing. It was so evocative because Latin is such a beautiful language. And it's something that I was just born that way, I guess, And now I sing that myself. I'm no longer a boy, but now I get to sing it, And so I was exposed to that liturgy for a limited time, but it impacted me in such a way that it's continued along my life until now. And so I've had some experience directly, but limited, because I was born in 62, and then the reforms came in, and But yeah, I just got the last wisp of the traditional rite before it was mutilated in 1969.
So I was born in 61, just the year before you.
Yeah,
but I really don't have any recollection of the traditional Mass as a child. I don't. And in a sense, maybe I think I was a little fortunate because I didn't have the carpet yanked out from under me. So what was it like for you when the Novus Ordo came on the scene, having had some exposure to the true Mass?
Well, it was different, certainly, because of the dropping of the Latin. And not only that, but the priest facing the people all the time, and that was a bit disconcerting. It is for me now as a priest, because I celebrate both the diocesan traditional Latin Mass since 2008 and the Novus Ordo as well. And it's the vestments changed too. They stopped being Roman, and the material was no longer a noble material. It was just so things were just kind of what's happened here. It was pretty much of a shock to me, and I, without being able to reason things out theologically like I might be able to now, I didn't like it. It's Mass, and I went to Mass, and it was as a young adult, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same. And then some Masses were really just kind of, very modern or modernist, if you will. And so it was a stark change. It was a stark change for me, as it was for many people. It just wasn't the same.
Sure.
I went to Mass, but it wasn't the same.
So what about seminary years? What was that like? I mean, was the traditional Latin Mass mentioned? Was it taught? Were some of your brothers seminarians? Was there any evidence that they were attached to the traditional rite back then?
Well, in my day, the diocesan seminary here in Oviedo, it had better times, before the council, like any seminary. It wasn't the best of places. It wasn't the worst of the time either in my diocese, but it certainly wasn't a model. We had some good professors in liturgy in the more advanced courses, but the traditional Roman rite really wasn't covered to some deep degree. It was just a historical anecdote. But in terms of seminarians, there were a few that I guess we could say were traditionally minded. I dare say not as much as myself, because they were younger than me, so they weren't exposed at all. What they knew was from what their parents might have told them, or older priests that were still alive at the time, but they didn't really experience it, though they liked it. But again, I think that I was really more passionate about it. The problem was that, in the 1990s, things were the way they were. Probably not as bad off as the 1970s. But again, nobody would ever dream in the 1990s that any of us would get ordained one day and be able to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass, because that just wasn't a possibility. It was a dream that you would never think had come true. But God had other plans, right? So,
right, and then Summorum Pontificum, I gather. If I remember your history correctly, you began celebrating the traditional Roman rite in 2008. That would have been the year after Summorum Pontificum. Mm-hmm. Did you undertake to study the traditional Latin Mass at that point, kind of from scratch, or were you exploring it before Summorum Pontificum?
Well, privately, yes. I was always interested in the liturgy. That's something that I was, born that way too. And God has graced me with a very deep sensibility for liturgical music, and liturgy itself as the celebration of the mysteries of faith. And I would never be one to celebrate clown masses or any of those things. I mean, I would totally abhor that. It's just something just completely different from my DNA. So I did some research on myself, even before internet came into the scene. I bought books on the liturgy, books that were preconciliar books, history of the liturgy, and I discovered quite a lot of things. And that's where I personally found out the differences between the rites, when I did my own personal study. And that confirmed objectively from people who were actual experts on this, what I felt as a child and what I started missing as a young adult when the Novus Ordo came in. I said, aha. So it's not just a question of the Latin, it runs deeper, the thing does. Yeah. It's a change of perspective.
You're in an interesting position not an enviable one in a sense. I mean, you're incarnated in the Diocese of Oviedo. Your bishop is supportive of you celebrating the traditional liturgy. And if I'm right, didn't you tell me that you're pretty much the only priest in your diocese that does celebrate the traditional rite?
At least publicly, in an official capacity, yeah. Okay. I've actually been appointed by the Archbishop.
Okay. So you're in a position to speak pretty clearly about the tension between these two rites. I mean, it's one thing for a layman like me to walk out of a Novus Ordo setting and into the traditional Mass, and obviously these are two different rites. It appears to be two different religions, pretty obviously. So can you talk a little bit about that tension from the altar? What's it like, this tension between the two different rites?
Oh yeah, that's I've given a lot of thought to that lately, ever since Traditionis Custodes, though before too. They're two different rites, two different underlying theologies. It gets very tiresome just to be gazing upon the people all the time. And my face is always a distraction for them too. It's an anthropocentric rite, the Novus Ordo. It's all very community based. The altar facing the people. Liturgically, that's ridiculous. I mean, the altar is for a sacrifice. It's made to God. It's not a community meal. The Novus Ordo just pushes that it has to be. It can be ad orientem, right? But it's not, because it's not designed for that. So with all the people, the readers, the lectors, the prayer of the faithful, everyone's doing something because this is active participation thing the Vatican II called for. And it turns out that people do so many things, and the Latin is gone, and this isn't a sacred action anymore. It doesn't look like it. And it looks like a Protestant supper, really, the Last Supper. But of course, in theology, the Catholic Mass is not the supper. And that's what the Novus Ordo really, even looking at the altar, which is no longer an altar, it's a table. You compare that with any traditional Catholic altar with the three candles, crucifix in the center, 3 candles on the other side, and facing a crucifix. Just by looking at the two different altar setups, without knowing anything about theology, you can just tell right away there are two different ways of conceiving this. One is definitely man-centered, one is God-centered. And this is not just going into the liturgical text, mind you, it's just the altar setup. A basic altar table, maybe with 2 candles, maybe on one side, both of them, and the other side empty. It's asymmetrical. It's just the altar setup in a Novus Ordo is like anything you want it to be. But in the traditional rite, you just have an altar. You've got the 3 candles, crucifix, 3 candles, and it's always that way. They're always constantly changing things to make things more, liturgy has to be closer to the people. And we've been doing this for 50 years or so. And never before has the people of supposedly God have been further away from God because of this liturgy that just alienates them. It alienates children. It alienates young people. And then you take part, and it's not just the liturgy, because then you take part in ridiculous priest meetings and priests scratching their head. How do we retain children in the church? How do we retain? It's like, we've got them in the Latin Mass. They're right here with their parents, little boys and girls and adolescents and young adults, and they go to confession and they pray, and the pilgrimage, we'll talk about that, the pilgrimage we just had these days here. We've got them in the church. Just give them a Catholic liturgy, give them a Catholic preaching, give them Catholic prayer, initiate them. Stop this nonsense about, walking together in this infernal synod process. It's just crazy. So it's not just the liturgical rite, it's everything that goes with it. It's not just the Novus Ordo, it's Novus Ordism. And that permeates the pastoral care of the church, and it's just one big mess. It's just a mess.
I've had a couple of different priests that I've engaged about the Novus Ordo and all of the deficiencies with it. They would say, in response perhaps to what you just said, yeah, but you're saying that you can look at the altar of a Novus Ordo and see a table, but you can also see an altar. If you want, say, hey, it's Catholic, because you can look at it in a Catholic way. They'll say the same about any number of prayers, the consecration narrative, which is now a narrative. You're telling a story to the people. The fact of the matter is, though, that's not Catholic liturgy. in Mediator Dei, Pius XII, writing about the liturgy, said the entire liturgy has the Catholic faith for its content. It doesn't have some amalgam of heresy and Catholic where you can seek out the Catholic interpretation. No, the whole thing's Catholic. Period, end of. It can't be viewed in a Protestant way, and you can't say that about the Novus Ordo. Now, I just have one last question before we talk about the pilgrimage that just took place in your diocese. And I think I'm going to save it, though. I want to save it to the end, because maybe we'll park this in the back of your mind and I'll ask you after we go through this whole thing. It might be the most appropriate time to ask what you might say to a brother priest who's now just Novus Ordo, but he's feeling drawn toward the true Roman rite. What kind of advice might you give that priest about making that move? I think we'll come back to that. So for now, though, I'd love to talk about something positive, something people can sink their teeth into and feel good about. I encounter the question, and I've pondered it myself a lot. Where is the visible church? We know the church is going to be with us to the end of time, but she's going to be visible. Where is she? Well, I think, if anybody that's visited the blog in the past few days, I posted some of your comments and photographs and a video
thank you.
From the recent pilgrimage from your Diocese of Oviedo to Covadonga. Tell us about that pilgrimage, Father. It looks like a wonderful event.
Well, great books on this. And my participation was always limited because of my obligations and family obligations too. But where to begin? My God, this is the third time we've done it. In 2021 was the first. The idea is to do something similar to what the Paris Chartres pilgrimage around Pentecost every year. They've been doing it for 40 some years now, and they're up to 16,000. I've heard up to 20,000 pilgrims from all over the world. So someone was inspired by the Holy Spirit here. Why don't we try to do something similar in Spain? God knows we know it. We need it. So fortunately, in 2021, this started, and it was. The organizers really expected only a busload of people, 50, 60 people. Turns out it was 500 in the first year. And it was the first time that I was able to celebrate the traditional Roman Mass in the solemn form, High Mass, with deacon and subdeacon. Until 2021, I've never celebrated the solemn rite, only just the low Mass, right? So I'll never forget that experience as long as I live. Just the pious details of the deacon always kissing the celebrant's hand every time they exchange liturgical objects, the incenser, the thurible, the spoon for the incense. Everything is just, it's a reverence to not the priest himself as a person, but it's Christ in that person who is doing the office of priest, high priest. And the music and the choir and the organ and the altar setup, a Catholic altar, and I felt like a priest. I mean, that seems odd to say, I guess, in the Novus Ordo land, but I felt like I knew my role. I mean, not that I don't know my role in the Novus Ordo. I do. I'm still the same person. I'm not schizophrenic. But anyone who celebrates both rites can tell the difference. So anyway, the first year, 500 people. Then in the second year, 2022, last year, we doubled to 1,000. And they came the first year too, but the second year, last year, they came from different countries: France, Portugal, Italy, Argentina, the United States. And that was amazing. We doubled in a year. And we filled the Basilica of Covadonga. It's a Marian sanctuary here, very special place. Very beautiful place too, natural setting. We couldn't fit anybody more in. It was just packed. And the confessions that were, I helped confess. There were, in one of the solemn masses outdoors, in part of the route, between Oviedo and Covadonga is like 90 kilometers or 60 miles, 20 miles a day, 30 kilometers a day. And during the high masses, people are praying, people are adoring, people are confessing. Endless confessions, Louie. Endless confessions. There were 8 of us, priests. Each of us had a line of of people wanting to confess their sins. I mean, talk about apostolic fruitfulness. I mean, And I saw the piety in these young people's faces and their parents. And like, these people aren't, Spain is a very touristy country, but they're not on vacation. They're on a pilgrimage. And there's a lot of priests, a lot of shepherds to shepherd the sheep of the Lord. There's rosary, there's adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, benediction, there's meditations. There's, this year, for example, last year too, here's a booklet for the pilgrim. See that? It's in Spanish, the Book of the Pilgrim. It's got all the texts of the Mass that are going to be celebrated. There are meditations here, good ones. A little catechism with all the Catholic doctrine. And, this is not just a throwaway thing. You keep it afterwards. You can be a Catholic just with the little booklet. I mean, the organization's impressive. Everything. It's just... And then this year, there were 1,200 people. Again, endless confessions. Adoration in the cathedral on the eve of the official start. Endless confessions. The smell of incense that brought me back to my childhood. It's, that smell, that prayerful offering up of prayers of Holy Mother Church. I saw the church visible, and I heard the church audible. And I smelled not so much the sheep or the shepherds, though there were a lot of both, but the sweet smell of that incense that rises up to God, that prayer, that liturgical prayer that we are unworthy really to participate in, because it's the prayer of the church. It's not our personal prayer. It's the public worship of the Immaculate Spouse of Christ, which is the church, that we are privileged to take part in. The liturgy is not our own thing. It's not our own. We can't do what we want to the liturgy. It's not ours. It's given to us. It's handed down through tradition, apostolic tradition. It's something that we don't manipulate. That's something that Novus Ordo has no idea. The liturgy is a toy that we can do with it what we want with it. No, it's not. It's something that we receive through apostolic tradition. And our participation in it is by grace. To participate in the worship of the church, not your own personal worship, not your own parish, not your own group, not your own diocese. It's the universal church, the one common language, Latin again, brought me back to my childhood again, and with these beautiful young people. And I mean, and in the Basilica this year, I recorded that video you shared, the Adoro te Devote from Thomas Aquinas, St. Thomas Aquinas, beautifully sung. The Basilica packed during Holy Communion. I mean, I was actually moved when I recorded that video. That's the church. So far removed from all this infernal synod nonsense and all this useless reunions of let's question everything. Let's... Sheer madness. And this is peace and the sweet smell of incense and vestments, beautiful vestments. The deacon kissing the hand of the celebrant. Of course he does, because it's Christ who's going to, through his hands, are going to be distributed. I mean, it's an experience. I saw a lad, but maybe 22 years old, on his knees with rosary in his hand. He was deep in prayer. I've never seen that at Novus Ordo. I've never seen that. Must have been 22 years old. It's like the grace of God rung strongly in this boy. I mean, and people just on their knees praying and just amazing. It's just amazing. These pilgrimages do so well. So they do so much good. It's just the Catholic Church. That's all it is. You want to see the church? There it is. You want to hear the church? There it is.
Well, it sounds like it certainly did good for the pilgrims, the lay people.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
It obviously did an awful lot of good for you and for the other priests who were present.
I can't put it in words. I try to, but I just can't. The experience is just overwhelmingly beautiful. It's just, you felt like a priest, that you were actually useful as a priest. It's just...
So imagine trying to organize a pilgrimage just like that. Same in every detail, except it's going to be Novus Ordo the entire way.
Well, won't work.
It's just not going to, right. It's just not
going to work.
Catholic. It's like mixing oil and water. It's not going to happen.
No, it's not going to work.
So it's
even if you had good priests, but it's not going to work. It's just not the same. It's not the same.
Well, they're two different faiths, and that kind of gives us a great opportunity to segue into Traditionis Custodes. I'm going to say it correctly in this podcast as much as I can, because I'm very used to saying Traditionis Custodes. I literally have to stop myself every time.
Right.
But I won't say the second part of that and the reason why I started that cojones thing. But this is one of the things about this document, Father, that I appreciate very much. I have to tell you, I appreciate Jorge Bergoglio very much. As long as we're clear about why I appreciate him. I appreciate him because Benedict
makes things very clear.
He does he not? I mean, Benedict's sheep's clothing was a little more convincing. I would give me the Francises all day long because they're very clear and they set stark black and white lines between what's Catholic and what isn't. And clarity is a gift from God. Confusion is of the devil. And Bergoglio gives us, inadvertently, he gives us an awful lot of clarity. Traditionis Custodes, I almost did it again, is one of those things. And he talks very plainly about the fact that the Novus Ordo, this is from henceforth, this is the lex orandi of the church, the conciliar church, over which he's ruling and reigning. He's right. We can't argue with him. It's 100% true. It kind of goes back to everything that you said. The Novus Ordo is a different rite. It's inspired by a different set of beliefs. One of the things I wanted to point out while we're on this, though, so the thing that Bergoglio said in Traditionis Custodes is he said that from this point forward, the Novus Ordo is to be considered the unique expression of the lex orandi of the Roman Rite. And I want to point out, it seems to be there's a little bit of confusion about lex orandi. You hear people say it all the time, lex orandi, lex credendi. And the takeaway for many people is that the law of prayer informs the law of belief. That's actually a little bit backwards. Pius XII, in that document, Mediator Dei, that I mentioned earlier, saw fit to clarify the proper relationship between the law of prayer and the law of belief. He said, quote, "If one desires to differentiate and describe the relationship between faith and the sacred liturgy in absolute and general terms, it is perfectly correct to say, lex credendi legem statuat supplicandi, which means, let the rule of belief determine the rule of prayer." And so it kind of makes sense. It's what the church believes is made manifest in the sacred liturgy. Sacred liturgy is a manifestation of the unity of faith that the church enjoys. Not so with the Novus Ordo. In a sense, it is. The law of prayer, that is the Novus Ordo, is motivated by, it's an extension of, a manifestation of what the conciliar church believes, which is something totally different in many ways from what the one true Church of Christ believes. So I think on that note, we have to be thankful that Bergoglio is, he's a pretty straight shooter when you get right down to it. He doesn't mince words.
Oh, no, he makes it very clear. I would say, though, it's not just what he says, the Novus Ordo being the unique expression. He specifically means the only expression, too. It's the unique, absolutely. But only. He's absolutely marginalizing the traditional Roman rite as this is no longer the Roman rite. That's absurd. I mean, that's just preposterous. It's like saying, I decree that the Trinity is no longer the Trinity because I say so. It's like, well, you can say what you want, but the Trinity is still the Trinity. I mean, you can't do that. If anything is not the Roman rite, it's the Novus Ordo. That's not the Roman rite. Even if it has certain elements, retained. I think someone did a study on this, you may know. I think only 13% of the prayers in the old Roman Missal are retained untouched in the new Missal. 13%.
13, wow.
13, I think it is. I don't remember the percentage of omitted altogether, and I don't remember also the other percentage of retouched for modern sensibilities, whatever that means. God knows. But 13%, I'm sorry, that's not a reform. That's a new rite. And they don't lie. It's Novus Ordo, no new order. It is. But they stamp Roman rite. No, it's not. No, so anyone who studies the liturgy in any serious way without prejudices, I'm sorry, this is not the Roman rite.
Yeah. One of the things that I think bears mention, though, is Francis is not a madman who came on the scene
I don't
out
think
of nowhere. He's carrying forward what the council asked for, in a sense. Look, no one can make the case, and if someone would like to try, I'd love to hear them make this case, that the council fathers, the bishops assembled at Vatican Council II, envisioned in any way, shape, or form that the Roman rite as they knew it, as they met, according to the 1962 Missal, would persist untouched alongside the Reformed rite, the one that was going to grow out of the Reform that was coming. No sense of that is given in Sacrosanctum Concilium, the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy, at all. It was very clear to every one of them that the Roman rite, according to the 62 Missal, was going to be reformed moving forward. That was their desire. None of them imagined that the traditional Mass would persist untouched. And the argument that we hear from Trad Inc. and the conservatives, or the Tradservatives, if you want to lump them together, as I often do, is that, yeah, but look, you look at the Novus Ordo, it really doesn't measure up to what the Council Fathers envisioned when you look at the text of Sacrosanctum Concilium. I think there's some truth to that. But at the same time, we have to be clear about what that Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy intended to do. It simply intended, in the Council Fathers' own words, to set forth principles and norms that should be applied in the reform moving forward. It was clear to every one of these guys that they didn't have the authority to tell the Pope how he was going to reform the liturgy. No ecumenical council has that power or authority. Even the valid ones, the 20 of them that actually belong to the church, never assumed to have the power to dictate to the Pope how he's to carry out his job as the supreme legislator of the Holy Roman Catholic Church. He operates in that capacity freely. So I think that's one of the things that may bear mention. I've been confronted with this before. Look, all of the traditional-minded bishops went along with Sacrosanctum Concilium. Well, the reason is because they understood that the Pope, the supreme legislator, he's going to actually carry out the reform. Whatever deficiencies there are in the Constitution, that's, he'll take care of it. Well, it ended up in the lap of Paul VI, and you see what we got. But if you're going to pound the pulpit and tell me that Paul VI was a pope, the Holy Roman Pontiff and Vicar of Christ, and so were the men that came after him, up to and including Francis, stop your complaining. You really don't have a leg to stand on.
No, because the Pope sanctioned it. So that's the reform. And even if it does go beyond what Sacrosanctum Concilium actually said, it doesn't matter. It's a moot point because it's signed by Paul VI. That's it. And we're not going to accuse the Pope of not following his own counsel. That doesn't make sense. I mean, we're not talking about some progressive theologian, the typical heretic. No, we're talking about supposedly the Pope who sanctions what the council said, even if it doesn't exactly say that. But it doesn't matter because I'm the Pope and I signed it, and that's it. That's the reform. And I put on the books, this is a Roman rite reformed according to the decrees of Vatican II because I say so. And if he's the Pope, well, that's it. You have to accept it, even if it's not true. But you have to accept it.
Right, I agree.
So we have this. I mean, you make a valid point, that you really don't have a leg to stand on. If the Pope sanctions it, we can't complain that it goes beyond it doesn't matter. He sanctions it. He's the Pope, right? So that's it.
Right. The Pope's not beholden to carry out the Council's idea of what a reform should look like. He's the Pope. He's the supreme legislator. He gets to decide as an individual. He could take into consideration what the Council suggested as a particular norm or principle that should be applied, but ultimately he makes the call. And as far as getting rid of the traditional Roman rite, the idea is preposterous. However, like the word abrogated, Francis uses that word in Traditionis Custodes. He talks about abrogating all of the norms that were established before this motu proprio. But the right way, I think, to think about this in Novus Ordo terms, the Novus Ordo is meant not as that which is going to abrogate the traditional Latin Mass, but rather to replace it. And this isn't Bergoglio operating on his own. He doesn't have an original bone in his body. Paul VI, speaking to a consistory of cardinals in 1976, he was complaining about Lefebvre and his movement and their resistance to the Novus Ordo. And he said these words. I think it's a valuable quote. He said, "The adoption of the new Ordo Missae, the Novus Ordo, is certainly not left to the free choice of priest or faithful. The instruction of 14 June 1971 has provided for this replacement." He says, "The new order was promulgated to take the place of the old." And then he explicitly invoked his supreme authority, calling the church to obedience saying that the new rite is a replacement for the old rite. He said, with the supreme authority that comes from Christ Jesus, we call for the same obedience to all of the other liturgical, disciplinary, and pastoral reforms which have matured in the years in the implementation of the Council's decrees. So it's very clear. Paul VI, who Bergoglio said in seminary, that was his shining light, Paul VI. He plainly said, the Novus Ordo, according to my supreme authority as the Roman Pontiff, if you want, you can believe such things, is ordering that the Novus Ordo should replace the traditional Roman rite. So,
right, because the idea behind that is that this is the reformed Roman rite with only 13% of the old Mass. It's like, really? That's not a reform. I mean, they're gaslighting us. I mean, that's not the reform.
Yeah,
it's a new rite.
Gaslighting phrase, it gets used a lot, but it applies here. Absolutely, no question.
I mean, it's like, well, because I say so. Well, I'm sorry, but that doesn't, the facts don't corroborate your action. And despite who you are or claim to be, it's just not true. It's just not true. And of course, if it's not true, that means I'm not trying to accuse Paul VI of being a liar, but there's obviously something diabolical here because it's not true. And they're peddling something that's just simply not true. Whether you like the Novus Ordo or not, that's not, Paul VI says this replaces the old because, in essence, this is the Roman rite now, which is what Francis is saying. It's not, never was the Roman rite. You can replace it, but then you can't call it Roman rite. But they want to expect us to believe that this is the Roman rite. Has even in Traditionis Custodes somewhere I read that I think towards the end where Francis says all the riches of the Roman rite are in the new rite.
Right.
13% of the prayers. What are you talking about? It's not true. I mean, it's just not true. There's something sinister about this. It's not true.
Right. It's not true because it's not Catholic. This was one of the things that I most appreciated about our three-way conversation with Brian McCall.
Brian McCall, yes, it was very nice.
Talking about the liturgy, and he and I agree on this very important point. The Novus Ordo is not Catholic.
No.
And it's not Catholic because the conciliar church and the faith that it teaches is not Catholic. So, I mean, I think, I feel sorry in a sense for those people who are caught up in trad ink and following the dictates of those who speak for this movement, traditionalism, who are going to somehow save the church. They're going to stand up against Pope Francis, which is a laughable thought in and of itself, that the lay people are going to rally to stand up against the Pope. You'd be hard-pressed to come up with a least Catholic thought than that. But I feel for these people who are trying to, jam that square peg into the round hole. This thing's not Catholic. And until they get over the hump that the conciliar church and its religion is not Catholic, and neither is their primary rite, the Novus Ordo, they're going to be mired in confusion for the rest of their lives.
The situation is really dramatic because Francis here in his document, he says something that's true and at the same time that's impossible. So it's a strange paradox. And until we clear this up, there'll never be a pax liturgica, there'll never be peace in the church because he's saying something that's very seriously wrong. He's claiming that the old Roman rite is not only it's not the Roman rite anymore, which is ridiculous, but that it no longer expresses the Catholic faith after Vatican II. That's impossible. That cannot be. And yet it is true that it does not represent the faith after Vatican II. So then we have a very big problem on our hands. And if there is some sort of incompatibility, it's not the old rite's fault that there may be something wrong then with the faith after Vatican II. So it brings us back to the council again. So it's the council that's wrong. Absolutely. It can't be the old rite because that's been what the church has been celebrating for 1,500 years, or 1,900 years, give or take. I mean, the Roman rite as such, but it has its apostolic roots. But the Roman as Roman rite, I think it's from the 3rd or 4th century, as such. But the point is, he's making a statement that cannot be true. You can't say this no longer represents the faith, because that is dangerously wrong. It's diabolically wrong. Why can't it express the faith? That it must be suppressed because of the unity of the church and all this nonsense. I mean, the church has been one, praying the same prayers for centuries and centuries and centuries. So that's a big problem until we settle this, that there's something wrong with the council or the post-conciliar era. There'll never be peace in the church. We'll always be fighting because we have to settle this once and for all. How can the rite of the Roman Catholic Church, just reach an end point after 1965? We can't pray like this anymore because we don't believe like this anymore? Is that so? Well, then we don't believe like Catholics anymore. You can't say that the old Roman rite isn't Catholic. That doesn't make sense. But that's what he's saying. That's no longer Catholic. What he really means, though he doesn't admit it, is that it doesn't represent the conciliar faith. No, that's true.
Absolutely.
But then the conciliar faith isn't the Catholic faith because then there'll be no problem, right?
Yeah, so
it's just common sense.
Right. The answer is it's right there in front of us.
It's right there.
Bergoglio
says... he says it. He says
the quiet part out loud.
Yeah.
He's brazen in that way, but he's not creating anything new. And the quiet part was said out loud by Cardinal Ottaviani and Cardinal Bacci when they put out the so-called Ottaviani intervention. Right. He plainly says in this intervention, which he submitted directly to Paul VI, he said that the Novus Ordo represents a striking departure from the Catholic theology of the Mass. And now you have Cardinal Roach, who back in March,
detail, as a whole, and in detail. That's
right, exactly.
That's a pretty strong criticism.
Quote. Absolutely.
It's a pretty strong
Cardinal
criticism.
Roach, the henchman for Bergoglio, he said the same thing to the BBC in March. He said the theology of the church has changed. So the thing is, I honestly think good people we complicate things that really aren't that complex. Everything that we're talking about adds up to what you just said. The faith changed at Vatican II. The conciliar faith is not the Catholic faith. They're two different religions. Of course they have two different rites.
They're admitting it. Right. That's what they're saying.
They're telling us this.
They're telling us that. Well, we already know. But it's nice to be told by your enemy that you're right. So we were right all along. So poor Archbishop Lefebvre was right all along. Thanks. Sure, he was right.
He was dead on the money when he said the conciliar church is not the Catholic Church. He stopped short, unfortunately, of drawing the next conclusion. If that's not the Catholic Church, the man sitting at the head of it certainly can't be the Holy Roman Pontiff. And
that's problematic. That's a problem. Yeah,
that's a can of worms that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that don't want to jump into that can because it's going to cost you money, it's going to cost you friends, it's going to cost you prestige and opportunities, and you name it. You're going to have to wear the scarlet S on your chest, and it doesn't mean Superman. It means sedevacantis, which is the dirtiest word in Catholicism nowadays. But I'm sorry, you can't tell me that 2 + 2 is 8. I'm not going to believe that. And I can't believe that the guy sitting on top of this church that's not Catholic is somehow the Pope. But at any rate, maybe that's another conversation for another day. One of the other things that jumped out to me, and if you read Traditionis Custodes for what it actually says, there was a sense, especially early on, trying to turn Roach into a boogeyman. Like he's this bad guy. And then he got the rescript from Francis, which kind of centralizes power in his hand when it comes to approving of the traditional liturgy being celebrated around the world.
So much for collegiality.
Exactly.
That's a Vatican II. Hey, this is but I'm the one who is in charge here. It's like it's just based on hypocrisy. It's just outstanding. It's a remarkable hypocrisy here.
Right? Has there been a less collegial regime in the conciliar church than the Bergoglio regime? No. He is exactly what that book called him, the dictator pope. But in a sense, that's just it, though, Father. You can see Satan's fingerprints all over this thing because he takes things that are true and good and twists them to evil ends. The Pope is, in a sense, he's not a dictator. He's a benevolent king, in a sense, because he speaks and acts on behalf of Christ the King, the most benevolent of kings. So there's something to it. Of course, the Pope should be calling the shots singularly because he's the supreme legislator. He's the supreme ruler of the church on earth. But this idea that somehow Roach managed to extract. And in fact, if I don't have it in front of me, I wish I did. Peter Kwasniewski, who's a very nice guy, and I enjoy.
He's a good friend.
Mixing it up with him and corresponding. He's
very knowledgeable, and has a great capacity of communicating and writing and conferences, and he speaks like a genuine believing Catholic. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I have a lot of hope for him. I mean, one of the things that he talked about early on was kind of painting the picture that Roche was able to extract from Francis this rescript that gave him this power. And
I don't think it took much effort. I think it's probably easy to do.
And he kind of likened it at time when, at the Last Supper, when Jesus turned to Judas and said, "Do what you must do." And like, that's a little bit of a stretch for me, because when you look at Traditionis Custodes for what it actually says, in several different places, it says that the changes that are happening, even though he gives lip service to the bishop being the moderator and promoter and guardian of the liturgical life of his diocese, he makes it clear that whatever is going to happen in that diocese is going to happen according to the guidelines established by the Apostolic See. He says it in a couple of different places. And then he also makes it clear that he's imparted authority to the Congregation for Sacred Rites and the Discipline of the Sacraments, or whatever the heck Roche sits atop of. He's granted the authority to them. This whole thing comes back to Francis. Francis's feet are firmly planted in the council. So, there is no Judas thing going on in the Bergoglian regime. They're simply carrying forward the revolution more aggressively than those who came before them.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. The text itself is just malignant. It's just cruelty and falsehoods, just based on lies. He mentions here about the survey that I took the survey. The Vicar General, I think this was 2020, if I'm not mistaken, or 2021, 2020 probably. The survey that they sent out, and the Vicar General of my diocese called me to have me answer the questions. Some of the questions, I think it was number 5, I don't remember how many questions there were, but some of them were just obviously questions to trap the priest into answering. I think it was number 5. I'm paraphrasing. I don't remember the exact wording, but it was. It's not toward the priest. The questions are asked of the bishops. In your diocese, is there really a pastoral need for this, or is it just a question of one priest who really wants to celebrate? That's not an honest question. That's slanted. That's to get the bishop to say, well, how could we ask, after 50 years of Novus Ordism, how can we're not going to have thousands of people clamoring for the old rite. They've never known that. That's not a fair question. It's all bogus. I mean, it's not an honest, simple, straightforward, honest. It's not. It's based on. And then another question was very just they gave themselves away. One of the questions in the survey to the bishops was, in your diocese, does the Novus Ordo is the Novus Ordo Mass ever celebrated like the old Mass? It's like, it's like you're going so far as to say, watch out, Bishop. I mean, watch out for those priests who celebrate the Novus Ordo, but use lace, Roman chasubles, Latin. I mean, ad orientem. That's a no-no. It's like, so it's not just the old rite; it's the Novus Ordo, as if it were like the old rite. That's not an honest question. I mean, the whole thing is just ridiculous. And then the survey results, which have never been published, I think it was Diane Montagna, I think she writes for the Remnant, that uncovered that there weren't so many negative answers to that. It was just, some bishops, well, there's peace here, there's no problem. Maybe bishops don't care much for it, but they let people be, and that's it, no problem. And so the lie is that we've had problems, the survey is all negative and such, and so I'm forced by, you bishops, my brother bishops, are asking me to take measures on this. And then he quotes John Paul II and Benedict XVI as being very benevolent, and he's going to be even more benevolent, but he has to withdraw their permissions because the bishops have said that this is a disaster in the diocese, which is not true. Again, it's not true, because we have never seen the results. And some of the questions that I just mentioned are just ridiculous questions. So, I mean, this is like the synod. It's all predetermined. They want the result that they want, And they give themselves the excuse to cover themselves with a listening church, which it's ridiculous because they only listen to themselves. The conclusions are already done before any of the reunions started for the synod. And the same thing with this ridiculous survey. They want to get rid of the Mass because they are seeing that this is growing everywhere. My understanding was that the first pilgrimage we had in 2021 came to the attention of the Vatican. And I remember somebody telling me it didn't sit well very much over there because we don't want another Chartres pilgrimage starting up. Right? Why not? So they want to get rid of this. And so they make up this excuse that, well, the circumstances, it's causing disunity. We have to take away these permissions. And it's just ridiculous. It's just absurd. It's based on lies. And we know who's responsible for the lying. The father of lies.
Absolutely.
It's not true. It's lying.
The behavior of this regime, it's evidence, clear-cut evidence that it's not a papacy. Think about the survey thing.
He's a politician. He's a political animal.
Absolutely. It amazes me how many people in the so-called traditional movement who insist that it's an absolute must that you accept and publicly proclaim that Jorge Bergoglio is the Holy Roman Pontiff, His Holiness Francis, gloriously reigning. If not for
who's trying to destroy the Roman Rite, who's trying to subvert Catholic morality. I mean, it's like, okay, whatever suits your fancy.
Supposedly someone like me, who's been very vocal about the fact that man can't possibly be the Pope because he's not a Catholic of any rank, according to the requirements for membership established by Holy Mother Church herself. But people like me, we're on the fast road to hell and heresy because I don't accept that this man could possibly be the Pope. But yet those same people are acting like, hey, we've never seen that survey result. How about showing us the results of that survey? As if the Holy Roman Catholic Church is some sort of democracy. Well, what if Bergoglio did produce survey results and that you didn't like the result? What the hell's the difference? He's the supreme legislator of the church, according to you. He doesn't need a survey. Yes, he's probably lying through his teeth about that survey. Who cares? If you really believe he's the Pope, like I said in the beginning,
it doesn't matter. That's a good point too. Yeah,
what's the point? Yeah. I mean, the survey is just, it's fluff. It's propaganda because that's how secular operations operate. And that thing in Rome is a secular operation in the business of peddling something that they're calling a religion. They call it the Catholic religion. It's identity theft. That's not the Catholic religion in Rome today. But yeah, the whole survey thing, I was surprised at the extent that people who claim that Bergoglio absolutely is the Pope and you have to stand up and confirm it along with me, got their underwear in a knot over this survey. What is the difference? If he's the Pope, it doesn't really matter, does it?
No. And you've been making the point, and you made it, as I recall, with our conversation with Brian McCall, and your AKA podcasts of late, you're saying something that's very true. You're saying you're not trying to convince people to agree with you about whether he's the Pope or not, because in essence, many people who are criticizing Francis for all the legitimate reasons that we criticize him for, they already agree with you in essence. They stop short of saying he's not the Pope. Fine, I can understand that. It's a problem to say he's not the Pope. I understand that. But your point is, look how you talk about him. It's not me, it's you. Look what you say about him. Listen to yourself. Does that sound like a Catholic talking about a Pope? You don't believe he's a Pope either. You just don't admit it. But your actions, your words, and that point must really strike hard in the hearts of people who, and I understand it's difficult to come out and say he's not the Pope, but they certainly don't act as if he were the Pope. I mean, and you point that out. It's like you don't have to agree with me because you already do. Just listen to yourself. And I think that point really hits home for a lot of people. They may not go that far or be as, let's say, brave as you to risk being labeled a set of economies. But again, the point is, we can't follow this man because of what he's doing. No Catholic is obligated to follow heresy or error. So if you want to think he's a Pope, go ahead. You don't follow him. How do you justify from a Catholic viewpoint He's the Pope, but I can't follow him. You have to, if he's the Pope. But you can't, because your Catholic sense stops you, because he's preaching heresy, blasphemy, insolence, idolatry, apostasy on steroids. The Pachamama, the Canada thing. I mean, that's just... You want to continue saying he's a Pope? Go ahead, but you have to follow him. But you can't, can you? So the way I deal with this, and maybe that's not the best way, is it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's important to know who the Pope is. It's not what I'm trying to say, but look, it doesn't matter because we're going to fight over this. If by some degree he can still be the Pope despite his heresy, you know what? He's still a heretic even if he's still the Pope for that crowd, right? You can't follow heresy. You can't follow apostasy. So what difference does it make if he's a Pope or not? You can't follow him anyway. That's just kind of to bridge the two impossibles. Oh, the Sedevacantist, that's the bad thing that you can't. Well, it's one way to understand this. You're not claiming to be completely right. You're just pointing out what you honestly, as a believing Catholic, think this man cannot possibly be the Pope. And you set out some pretty powerful reasons. That's it. Can you be wrong? Yeah, you could be wrong. But you're honest about it. Other people might disagree that, he's still the Pope. Well, then you have a hard time trying to convince us, then can a Pope go about like Bishop Strickland, even though he does apparently approve of Amoris Laetitia? I heard your podcast on that. But he does say that Francis is the Pope, but he has a program to undermine the deposit of faith. Gee, I don't think a Pope can really do that. I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
No, that's an indication that he...
So it's just a label.
Either doesn't know or
is just a label.
Does not believe what the Church has always taught about the Holy Roman Pontiff and the gifts bestowed upon him by our Lord so that he's able to feed the sheep, the nourishing food that we need to, stay on the sure path to salvation, to protect us from the poisonous food of error. He's a factory for the poisonous food of error. I mean, I understand what you just said, and from a theoretical standpoint, one of the problems is it goes beyond just the public positions taken by these people that make up Trad Inc. So, they're saying Francis is the Pope. They're behaving as if he's not. But in the process, there are people out there that they see the first part. They see this group of highly respected men who have very active podcasts, and they're very active on the speaking circuit, and they're writing lots of books. And these are men of respect with theology degrees. They're probably right. That guy's the Pope. They're digging in and doing battle against him. No, I'm not going to do that. He's the Pope. So what they're doing, inadvertently, I'm not saying they're doing it on purpose, they're training up a whole generation of Protestants who think it's a Catholic thing to say, yes, Holy Father, I'm going to dig in and resist you. That's not how the Church works. That's how Protestantism works. Protestantism takes what comes out of Rome, a true Pope in Rome, runs it through the filter to make sure it measures well with what they believe to be the true faith. That's how Protestants roll. So you have a guy like Mike Lewis, I think is his name, that runs this blog Where Peter Is. He, like Trad Inc., he's adamant. That's the Pope. But his attitude towards him is more Catholic. Like him or not, his attitude towards Francis is more Catholic than the attitude on display by the people on the traditional circuit. No, you can't have it both ways. You cannot. You're living in just an irreconcilable situation. If he's the Pope, you don't have a leg to stand on. Stop. If he is not the Pope, say so. So anyway, I don't know what's going on inside these men that have to publicly insist that he's the Pope. Our Lord will sort that out. But I feel like it's an important thing to remind the people that might, in their heart, they know this guy's not Pope. And they might speak that truth to the wife over dinner, but God forbid they take it public. Yeah, well, I wouldn't want to be that man on Judgment Day. I would not, but...
No, it's really a mess. It's either way you fall on this issue. The infighting is sad too, because that doesn't help. Our enemy are those who are trying to destroy the Church from within. But see, the problem also is, we talk of a false church, a conciliar church, and that's all true. But the problem is it's not a separate church from the Catholic Church in the sense that these men are occupying Catholic positions of authority, though they themselves are not Catholic. And they're using the church's institutions to subvert from inside. They're really like parasites. They're infiltrating the institutions of the church. I mean, they're not building other churches and calling themselves a separate church from the Catholic Church. No, they're calling themselves the Catholic Church. But of course, they're not in a theological sense, but in a practical sense, they're occupying the Vatican. They are occupying the congregations or dicasteries now. So they're using the church's institutions to inject poison into the body of the church. And we have to go along with it because they're the legitimate pastors. It's like, oh, that's just not true. And things are going to get far worse than they are now with the synod. And I'm thinking we once had a conversation. Wouldn't it be great if they really went forward with this synod and ordained women? That would be great, wouldn't it? That would be great. It's like, I mean, what now? We accept this too as coming from a legitimate pope? Really? Ordination of women? That is impossible. That is just impossible. So I guess the worse things become, the better, because it may open up more eyes to saying, this can't be the Catholic Church because then it's changed. Then it's no longer defectible. But that can't be true because we know the Catholic Church isn't defectible. But there's so much gaslighting going on. It's like this thing about continuity. There is no continuity. Sorry, there isn't. There's no continuity between the Roman Rite and the Novus Ordo. There's no continuity. There's no continuity between what the church has always taught, what they're peddling now in the synod. I mean, it's just, they're going to legalize everything. It's sexual sin especially, and this is still the Catholic Church. It can't be the Catholic Church because this is not some heretic loose somewhere. It's officially being promoted by supposedly the Pope and the bishops who he handpicked to carry on this synodal process, right? So, and they're trying to gaslight. No, doctrine is not going to change. Oh, really? It's just going to be the pastoral approach. That's modernism. Come on. So, how long could this charade go on? I'm just wondering how long before we realize we're being lied to. And this is not the Catholic Church, even though it's coming through the institutions of the Catholic Church. That's the problem.
Yes, I like in that situation, the theological versus the practical. I don't know that there really can be a dichotomy there. What you have, I think, are in the various sees, what we had during the Arian crisis, where there were usurpers sent in to these dioceses to occupy the chanceries. They weren't the bishops, they were usurpers. The real bishops had fled for their lives because they were, under attack and would have been murdered by the Arians had they stuck around. So they were in exile, the true bishop. Now, we can't necessarily point to different dioceses around the world and identify a true bishop who's in exile because the usurper's there. But these are usurpers that have just simply taken up real estate. That doesn't make them the legitimate authority. They're not. They stopped being Catholic. And I think this is one of those parts of the conversation where, look, we don't have to have all of the answers. We don't. Nobody has them. I don't know how this thing's going to get cleaned up. I don't know what the details are going to be about what supposed bishop in a particular see, what decisions of his actually have effect moving forward. And I don't need to know all that. All I need to know is Catholics are those who are baptized, externally manifest to profess the true faith. And I'm going to stop there because if you just hit that one requirement of being a Catholic, find me a Catholic bishop who truly has jurisdictional authority who's teaching heresy. He's not a Catholic. I think we get lost in the weeds trying to figure out the details about, just things that we can't answer today.
Right, and also the excuses which, laymen or priests even, we don't have the authority. It's not a question of authority. It's a question of, look, you are being taught error. I mean, how do we know this? Well, if you have a minimal knowledge of the Catholic faith when taking the synod, right, they're trying to normalize sexual sin. They're not hiding it. It's very open. Does that not ring a bell? Does that not light up something red in your head? Does it? Wait a minute, something's wrong here. I'm being told something that is not Catholic. You don't need a commission of cardinals to tell you that. You've got them doing it. So we're going to normalize sexual sin. Does that seem okay to you? Do you want to go along with that? I mean, but doctrine's not going to change. They're also saying that. So it's like, I don't know what it is. It's just a phenomenon of obedience is to God, really, and obedience to legitimate pastors when they're legitimate, when they're actually teaching the faith. Because, Louie, something that we all know this, but I think it should be stressed. The supreme law of the church is the salvation of souls. Even the last canon, and I think it's 1752 in the Code of Canon Law of 83. If we honestly believe that, what's at stake are souls. Okay, so what we may be wrong in our opinions, we may be right, whatever. But my goodness, we have to be clear on one thing. The salvation of souls is something very important. It's very crucial. It's not a joke. It's not a game. So we may lose sight of this, and I think we should never lose sight that, whether you think he's a pope, whether you don't think he's a pope, look, we're all in this together. We should be, for the salvation of souls. That's why we have these pilgrimages. That's why we have good catechesis. That's why we have this and that, because salvation of souls is important. It's crucial. It's decisive. That's what we're in business for. And if some people don't have that in mind, they're doing a disservice, and they're not in the service of the King of Kings. We have to be very clear on this. Why are we doing what we're doing in the church? To save souls, our own and everybody else's. That's the end. Because if we don't save our souls and our bodies, our lives would have been useless. And God certainly doesn't want us to lose ourselves. Do we love God? If we love Him, then we have to obey His commandments. And we have to obey His church, His unadulterated church, and obey His liturgy and obey His doctrine. And if by some quirk of fate that we have to live in these terrible dark times of diabolical disorientation, how do we sort out this mess so that we can remain Catholic no matter what, and work for the salvation of our own souls and the souls of whom we love and everybody else's souls? That's what priests are for. That's what we're supposed to be in business for. I mean, why do we, one of the beautiful things that I experienced also on this pilgrimage is, do you know what it is for 20-year-olds, when being introduced to me by some priest friend, kissing my hand reverently as if it were the most normal thing to do today? It's like, it touches my heart. I mean, it's like, why do they do that? It's not my hand, really. I mean, it's my consecrated hand. It's mine. But because it's through my hand I can give them the Eucharist. It's through my hand I can I can absolve their sins. It's like that piety. Vatican II did away with all that. It's a grievous loss. It's terrible. So many details of this. 20-year-olds kissing my hand as if it were the most normal thing in the world. 8-year-olds going on their knees to receive Holy Communion with their eyes closed, pious, sticking out their tongues so that they can receive our blessed Lord, and they know what they're doing. I mean, this is what these people in charge of what's going on in the Vatican would deprive us of. Why? That cannot come from God.
Oh, absolutely not. Father, you remind me.
It can't come from God.
Back when I was out there defending the council in my conservative adolescence, I was in a diocese. I'm not going to name it, because when I was introduced to the bishop, I dropped to a knee and I kissed his episcopal ring. And you would have thought that I grabbed him by the face and kissed him on the cheek and said, "Fredo, I knew it was you." His reaction was one of absolute horror.
Oh.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. So they kind of told the tale about where he stood. But Father, you made me think of something. Our Lord, how much does He will our salvation? You're right. That is the bottom line.
That's it. That's all.
That's what it's all
comes
about.
Down to that. It's very serious business.
He did not give us a church that's like the Rubik's Cube or some unsolvable deep mystery. Yes, there's things attached to this crisis that we can't answer. But at the end of the day, it's as simple as with me or against me. And you said something important. It's not about having the authority to say that man's not a bishop or that man's not a pope. It has nothing to do with authority. Our Lord didn't give us a church where you have to have authority vested in you to know what a Catholic is and to know who a Catholic is. St. Robert Bellarmine said membership in the church is palpable. I mean, that means it's obvious. It's knowable. We know one another. So we don't have a shot at helping others or ourselves attain to salvation. The only way we're going to do that is through the Catholic Church. If we can't identify who's Catholic and who isn't, our Lord made it very simple, actually. The church makes it very simple to find out who's Catholic and who isn't. Now, if I had a new family move into the neighborhood next week, it might take me a few weeks of conversation with them to get a handle on whether they're Catholic or not, even if they call themselves that. In the case of a guy like Bergoglio, who's on the record with blasphemies and heresies and apostasies, there's no question. This man's not a Catholic. The church that he runs isn't Catholic. That is simple and obvious. It's obvious. And until we can get that right, there's no hope of us, forget helping others attain to salvation. If we don't know what the church is and what a fake church is, the odds are stacked against us. You know, our Lord's going to sort all this out for us individually when we stand before him. He'll know who was confused, and he'll treat them appropriately. He'll know who was also not confused but was afraid to go public, and he'll know everybody in between. But in the meantime, my stance is going to be that this is actually not that complicated. Forget all the questions we can't answer. Let's focus on the ones that we can answer. We can answer. The Holy Roman Catholic Church does not err in faith or morals. That's what she's always taught about herself. We know who the members of the church are because they externally manifest and profess the true faith. With those two bullets in the chamber alone, I can go to war and try to find the church and work for my salvation through the Holy Catholic Church, because that's what we're here for. Anyway, this has been a great conversation, Father. It's run its length. I've pushed some of the podcast up to an hour, and I think I'm trying people's patience by doing that. We're a bit over that now, so I want to go back to that one question to wrap this thing up. And thank you for spending so much time with me. What
My
would
pleasure.
you say to a brother priest who is feeling drawn to the traditional Roman rite now, especially in this, post Traditionis Custodes age, where he's inviting himself to be, you have a bishop who's appointed you and is supportive of the traditional Roman rite. What about a guy that's not a priest who's in a diocese where, attempting to learn and to celebrate the traditional Mass is going to mean a boatload of trouble for him? What would you say to that man?
Well, if he's not as fortunate as I am to have an understanding bishop, well, that's regrettable. But again, some priests that I met on this pilgrimage this year, they're not the ones designated by their respective bishops in their diocese. They celebrate it privately, maybe with a group of young people kind of in the shadows. Okay, fine, do it. But in terms of what would I say to a priest, learn the rite. There's books on it, there's articles, internet, resources. There's a lot that you can. I would be happy to train anybody to celebrate the Mass, as someone kindly with charity trained me, who was on the pilgrimage, by the way. So learn the rite. I would tell any priest, you don't know what you're missing. Don't listen to all the falsehoods of, that like akaCatholic turns people away. That's been peddled from the 1970s. I mean, I know that's not the case. When children, adolescents, talk to me with normalcy, and it's all based on lies, okay? Don't be afraid of the Latin. It's drawn young people like nothing is ever done in the vernacular, because there's something holy. It's wholesome. The traditional rite is entirely holy. The entire rite is it's holiness. It's touchable. It's amazing. Just let yourself be trained by what the church has been doing for centuries. The rubrics. It's not something that you improvise. The Novus Ordo is just a big showcase of improvisation. Because since you're always facing the people, it's like, you're not the showman, you're not the main actor here. This is not some drama thing. The traditional rite makes you be the priest that you're supposed to be. You do only what you're supposed to be. It's not your creativity. It's not your genius way of looking at things. You just follow the rules. And if you do that piously, you will do your function. God, our Lord, uses our unworthy persons to make himself present on the altar. And how appropriate it is that as a priest, we are all directing the eyes of our faithful, not towards us, not towards our face, that's a distraction, but to the crucifix. And when you elevate the host that's no longer bread and it's the Lord, they shouldn't see you. They should see Christ through you. The traditional rite is a sublime exercise of the priesthood as the Catholic Church understands it. We're offering a sacrifice. We're not offering a meal, even though, obviously, there is communion and there is a taking of the Holy Eucharist, and there is, you take it in. But it's not a community meal. It's a sacrifice. Learn the theology of the traditional rite. Learn the theology. Dr. Kwasniewski has written beautifully on this, and other authors. Learn the theology. It'll help priests know what a priest really is. It's harder to be that way in a Novus Ordo, and one of the most sublime things is that being a traditional minded priest, celebrating the traditional rite, people are drawn to it of all ages, and they'll look up to you as a priest, and that should be a humbling experience. When they think with kissing of the hand, it's like, I never once, honest to goodness, I'm speaking from the heart here, okay? Honest to goodness, when these young people kiss my hand, I'm humbled by it. It's not me. It's my consecrated hands. And by the way, the Archbishop who passed away, the one who ordained me in 1996, he was quite old. He was consecrated bishop in 1965. He ordained me in 1966. I'll never forget that day, because even if it was an Novus Ordo, he was an old rite bishop. The way he anointed my hands, I'll never forget that. With patience, with kindness. I mean, my hands are very well anointed. And of course we should kiss the priest's hands. Why not? I mean, but all of this is gone in the Novus. It's gone. It's just gone. It's this reverence. And liturgically, when the deacon kisses the priest's hands, always, whenever they exchange liturgical objects, even the gospel, when the gospel and the lectionary that the subdeacon chants the epistle, the subdeacon also kisses the hand of the priest afterwards. The deacon afterwards with the gospel. I mean, it's all. The priest is really a priest. He's not some sort of religious peddler of things. The identity crisis of the priest. Of course, there's been an identity crisis of the priesthood. Of course. The Novus Ordo has taken that away from us. You don't feel like a priest. Of course you don't feel like a priest. You feel like a showman on the altar or the table. And then the sense of sacredness is gone, since everyone can go into the tabernacle and take out the Eucharist to give out, the extraordinary minister. I mean, that's ruination. I mean, if everyone can handle it, then it's like there's no difference between the priesthood, ministerial priesthood, and the priesthood of the baptized. There is a difference. I would encourage very much any priest not to be afraid to learn the Mass, learn the theology, and be the priest that God wants him to be. And the faithful will appreciate that. And he'll know that when people confess. It's like, Louie, honestly, when these young people confess these days, they look at me as a father. And I cannot help but feel like a father to these people. Because that's one of those, God has graced me with this deep fatherly care for especially young people, because my heart, just goes out to them, people of all ages, but little kids, and just I really feel sorry for them because they have such a hard time in this crazy world we live in, and yet they come to me dressed as a cassock, they kneel. It's like they know what they're doing because they see someone special, not because I'm special, because I'm not. I'm just as sinful as anybody else, but they respect my ministry. I'm someone sacred to them, not because of myself, but because of my ministry. It's not just the Mass, it's everything that goes with the Mass. It's all the sacraments, it's the breviary, it's the sacramental rituals, it's everything. So they've ruined everything. They've ruined everything. And the Novus Ordo, yes, I'll never celebrate a clown Mass. That's true. But I know that that's not the future. It's not the future. And the traditional rite will be the future. We're living through a dark age now. We'll get out of it. But I would encourage to really learn this because it touches upon everything else that you do as a priest. It affects every aspect of the priesthood and the faithful and the church and Catholic dogma, Catholic doctrine, Catholic morality. It permeates everything. It gives you a Catholic outlook on life. And what more can you ask? So by all means, learn it because it's just the Catholic way of life. And I'm sorry I rambled, but I'm trying to speak from the heart.
No, I appreciate that very much. I mean, it's moving to hear you say all these things. But if I were a priest, you're speaking to priests. I always like to encourage viewers, visitors to the blog, share these things. This particular podcast, if you share nothing else, share Father's answer to that question with those priests that you know of who are trying their best to be holy and obviously have a hunger for the Catholic faith that maybe are privately, or maybe they're feeling that call towards the traditional liturgy, and just have them watch the last 5 minutes of this thing to hear what Father Marqués had to say. I'm going to get that right from now on, Father.
That's right. Yeah.
All right, well, I can't thank you enough for spending time with me here. It's late over there in Spain. What is it? I guess it's 11:30. Yeah.
It's 11:30. 6 hours ahead of you.
Well, thank you so much.
But very happy to be on board, Louie. God bless your efforts, and God bless everyone else's efforts who are trying to sort this out. We're all in this together. So
yeah, we'll make it somehow.
Yeah.
God will.
Oh, we will. We will. But we know what we have to do.
Yes, we do. All right, Father. Well, hopefully this will not be the last time we come together. Thank you again, and
I'm very honored, Louie.
Thanks everybody for watching. Look forward to seeing you next time. I'm Louie Brecchio, and that is Father Marqués.
Marqués.